Today we're working on disassembly and cleaning of the engine. I'm not going to rebuild this engine yet, although it has, over 200,000 miles on it. It ran just fine. So I'm just going to put a gasket set in it and run it for now, and then later on rebuild it, or maybe come up with a 351 Windsor to rebuild and replace this one. But for the short term, we're just going to get this running and drive it a while to work all the bugs out. So I've got the motor all apart for the most part, so I got to take the pan off, waiting for a few parts. But I'm going to scrub these heads up. I accidentally, when I was pressure washing it, got some water up in the exhaust, and this valve here for the exhaust valve must have been open on this one, and got a little water in here. So I'm soaking it with some PB Blaster, and I'll take a little steel wool and just clean the wall back up. It wasn't bad, just a little bit of surface rust, flash rust, but I'll get that cleaned up, get the head surfaces cleaned up. I did order another timing set for it, so this one's probably not terrible, but not good. Figure if I'm in here, I might as well do that. That's cheap. I'm not, like I said, I don't want to rebuild it yet, but if I'm this far, I might as well at least do a few things. But everything looks pretty good. You can still see the hatching in the cylinder walls, which I don't know if that really means anything. And I haven't cycled all these cylinders yet to make sure that the walls all look good. I think they'll be fine. It wasn't smoking or burning oil, no more than I would expect. But I'll run those and up and down, look for scratches and ridges and stuff. As long as that's decent, then we'll keep running. If I find something glaringly wrong, of course I'll deal with it. But till then, we're gonna keep trucking. And then I'd like to put about 5 pounds of boost on this with a single turbo setup. So with this loosened up old motor, it should be fine to handle that. But new head gaskets, I've got some ARP head bolts that I ordered. Guys normally recommend going with studs. They're stronger than bolts, but I'm going to run bolts for this because I don't want to spend $150 on a set of studs when I can get bolts for $50 just for now. In the rebuild, I'll go to studs and probably different heads or something as well. So like I said, this is just doing it on the budget. And then at the same time, I'm working out the shifter issue. The S10 shifter it's got a bend in it here, and you can't bolt on a shift stick, which is like the factory Mustangs like that, where you can buy aftermarket shifters for it, shift levers. This one you can, it screws on it, which I could probably find one. But so my plan is, I've read, I think it was on the Ham and some other sites, I can buy a aftermarket Mustang T5 shifter that has positive bolt stops. There's a Chinese knockoff, we'll just use that for now. Hurst and another company do sell S10 shifter that'll fit, that's aftermarket, but geez, they're $200 or something like that. So I bought one off eBay for $30. Haven't got it yet, but I can supposedly re-drill the holes, because this plate is aluminum in the aftermarket one. So I'll just cut off what I don't need here, re-drill where the holes need to be closer together for the S10 shifter, and then we'll try that. Other guys have done it, and it seemed to work, so I don't foresee any issues doing that. But then I can get an aftermarket shift lever that fits the truck. This one, as is, I can't get it in any of the second, fourth, and reverse, because it hits the seat the way this comes up. So I could heat this and bend it, straighten it up, but this whole shifter is kind of sloppy. Adding the shift tower with the positive stops, there's like bolts that run in the front and the back to keep the shifter from overthrowing, I guess. So I like that idea. And it's a short shifter too, so when I put the longer lever on it, it won't be like I'm rowing a boat. Hopefully it'll be nice short throws for the shifter, but hopefully not too short. And then I've got the motor mounts all painted up since I took the engine back out. Figured it'd be a good time to do that. There's our transmission cross member. Got little runs in it. The metal was a little cold when I was spraying it, but nobody's ever going to see it. So we're coming along here, I think. Still have to clean up the intake. I've got that under the rag there. I'm not sure I'm going to do that. I really don't want to take all the injectors and everything, strip it completely down to clean it, considering what we're doing with it. So I'll probably just hit that with air and a brush here and there and just kind of clean it up. And then I'm still working on the intake and valve cover polishing project. I got the paint mostly stripped off the intake and that valve cover. I'm going to have to sand the rest of it off. Whatever coating they put on these things, it's probably powder coating or something. And it's tough stuff even for this aircraft paint stripper that I'm using. But in between things, I plan to sand and get these polished up a little bit. So I got one valve cover done already, just to see how. I wanted to test the whole theory before I invest a bunch of elbow grease in it, but I think that they'll polish up good. This will need some sanding because it's really, it's cast, so it's really rough finish, but I've got some, I can just start with, 80 grit and work up from there. It'll be good enough for this. If it looks good from a distance, then I'll be happy. So a guy could probably just polish it up as it is with that surface, but might as well smooth it out a little bit while I'm dinking around. I got to remove that paint anyway. But just come across something I've not seen before, at least that I remember. I thought I would just point out on these valve cover gaskets how to remove it. There's actually little metal discs embedded all spread out across the valve cover, mostly where the bolts attach, but these little metal spacers make it so you don't over torque the valve cover down, which I'm sure those out in the land of misfit toys have seen this plenty of times. But I've put on quite a few valve cover gaskets in my time, and I don't remember seeing that. But the way they're installed in there, maybe a guy doesn't normally see them when you just put the gasket on. But I fought valve cover gaskets like most of you guys, I'm sure, over the years leaking, and that's a neat trick to keep you from over tightening it all the way around, and especially deforming them. This had aluminum valve covers, so you don't have to worry about deforming them, but if you don't tighten them down all equally level, I could see you're going to squish out here and there, just like anything. It's going to be out of whack. But also something else I recommend, these little scrapers like this that use a disposable razor blade work really great for cleaning off these surfaces. Guy has to be careful, especially if you're using it on aluminum, not to gouge into the aluminum. But if you get your angle figured out, you can usually just scoot right across these surfaces and clean this stuff up. I've also got a they're like a Scotch-Brite pad disc, these here, that goes on a little air die grinder or whatever. People don't recommend using these because, man, it creates a lot of fine debris. So if you're not careful, if you do use these and get that fine debris in your oil passages, you're going to have probably some bearing issues down the road. So normally what I do is I cover everything that has that's not the surface I'm using. So I'll fill all the cylinders up with rags, tape over any oil galley holes, that way, and then I'll come back and just clean the oil galley holes with a razor blade or something. But those things work so good to clean gasket surfaces. But again, the metallic dust that it creates could be a killer on engines, so a lot of guys just shy away from it completely. And if you're using it on aluminum, it can scratch the crap out of aluminum, but you can get different grits of the disc pad. They sell, in fact, I've got a bag there that's full, so you can see the different colors, which indicates basically the grit, I guess, of the pad itself. So anyway, I like using them, especially on like farm equipment that's not quite so tedious as a race engine, which this is not a race engine. But depending, like I said, if you're doing a $10,000 engine, I probably wouldn't use those. But for junkyard motors, something like this, it sure makes cleaning up a lot faster. What I'm doing here is on the front and the back of these heads, since they can be installed on either side, there's holes that go into the head, and on the back side, as the engine's installed, there's plumbing to this from the air pump or smog pump, and it pumps air into these ports. So when it's cold, it kind of acts as a choke system. That system's going to be removed for this install, and so I need to plug these holes. When I took the fittings off, these were completely packed full of carbon, so that thing wasn't working anyway. And what I'm going to install are these inserts that are also, as you can see, threaded on the inside. So once the plug's installed, you still have a threaded hole for accessories order, which I don't have any accessories on the back, so you could probably just take a 5/8 coarse thread bolt, put it in there and cut it off, but I went ahead and ordered. These aren't expensive. The factory installs them on the front side, so when you're mounting all the accessories on the front, you've got a threaded hole to mount things to. But on the back side is where the, like I said, the smog system connects. So I don't have a thread chaser that's 5/8. My biggest one is this 9/16. So what I've done is I've taken a 5/8 bolt and just cut slices in it. So I've not done that before, but it seems like it would work. I know the thread pitch isn't as high as I don't think these are. These kind of cut in a little bit better, but this will be better, I think, than just chasing a regular bolt in there. I've taken a pick, these, and try to, in some PB Blaster, and try to scratch it out as much as I can. So now I'm going to run this in and get those threads hopefully cleaned up better before I install this. And it's recommended to at least use high temp RTV on this, because that could leak potentially through the threads. So kind of thought about just putting JB Weld on there, since, you know, these are kind of junk heads anyway. But I'll do a little more research online before I actually install these. But I can run a, I don't know if that's 5/16 thread or whatever, but I can run a 5/16 bolt into that, and then run the insert in, and then assuming that gets tight enough, I should be able to back that 5/16 bolt out. That would be easier than running it in using this screwdriver looking thing, if I didn't have a screwdriver that fits that just perfect, which maybe I do, and I want to do the other. But a lot of guys just run a bolt into that, install it, then back the bolt out, and you're good to go. So that's where I'm at the moment. I'll have to do this on both heads, both which would be the back side as you're looking at the front of the motor. And these are the thread inserts that I'm using. I'm sure there's multiple brands. These were, I don't know, I got 4 for $12 or $15, I don't know, something like that. So far this is working fine. Little homemade thread cleaner. You can see it's packing full of dirt like it should as I go. So normally when I do this, you know, spray some penetrating oil or something in there, but run it in a little bit, back it up, run it in a little bit, back it out, clean it out, run it in a little bit, back it in, you know, kind of almost like you're running a regular thread tap, where you want to just go a little bit back up, a little bit back up, and then, you know, periodically keep cleaning it out as you go. But yeah, that's working fine. So I can't completely decide on what thread sealant to use for these Thermactor plugs, is what the technical term is. It just says a high temp sealant's recommended. A lot of people were recommending high temp Loctite, which I don't, the stuff I have doesn't say it's specific. I have red and blue Loctite, but it didn't say high temperature specifically. So I looked through all my sealant, and the highest temperature stuff I appear to have is this stuff. It goes up to 650 degrees. So I think I'll use that. I thought about JB Weld, but I don't know if that really works as a thread sealant, because there's not a lot of space in the thread. So I don't know what JB Weld's tolerances are in a squish seal like that. I mean, I've used JB Weld a lot for odds and ends, but not as a thread sealant. So I don't think I'm going to use that. But I've got Permatex Super 300, that high tack stuff, but all that's rated like 300 degrees. Permatex, the Teflon coated stuff, but all that's, like I said, considering this is exhaust, I think I'll go with this. But I will say, even looking in there now, which I probably can't get that, there you go, it's plugged anyway, so it probably ain't going to matter too much what sealant I put on it, because I'm not sure exhaust is going to get through that carbon buildup that's clear back there anyway. So I think we'll be fine with using this stuff. Time will tell. I can always get this if I had to change them again later, but I think I could probably put this in without thread sealant, as long as you bottomed out good and tightened them down good. But I don't see how this is going to hurt anything to do. Making some more progress on the engine regasket project here. Got the block all cleaned up, cylinders cleaned up, heads cleaned up, everything's starting to go back together now. Got a Felpro gasket kit to go back together with. Make sure if you do take these apart to reassemble, keep track of wherever every push rod goes and its orientation so you can put it back exactly where it was. Anything used gets a wear pattern in it, so if you put it in the wrong spot, it'd probably work, but it will likely wear out faster because it's not bedded into that same spot that it's used to. I went with ARP studs, or sorry, bolts. I didn't do studs because they're probably twice the money. They are better. The studs are a lot stronger, but I figured ARP bolts should be fine. They're better than factory stuff. Use Teflon coating on the threads on all the lower ones because they go into a water jacket. These upper bolts, they use the stuff that comes with the kit, the ARP lube stuff. I don't know. It's that way all their torque stuff's correct if you use everything that they use. I would note, make sure that your final torque is 70 foot-pounds. You're supposed to use the recommended procedure, but the last torque needs to be 70. I don't think the factory's that high, so don't overlook that in the instructions. And I don't think I knew that either. I watched somebody else's video about that and made note of it. I did put on a new timing set, just a double roller from Cloy's. Figure while I'm in here, I might as well put a tight chain back on. The other one had some slack in it, so it's, like I said, it probably didn't have to be done, but if I'm this far, that's silly not to do it. So right now I'm cleaning up the oil pan. It's winter time, so normally just do this outside the pressure washer, but I've got some hot water cooking on the stove there. Just fill this little tub up and a little degreaser and some dish soap and some elbow grease. Getting that taken care of. So what I'll be doing next is I bought a plug to plug this factory level sensor or something like that. I'm not going to have that in this truck, so I'm just going to plug that hole because they have a tendency to leak. And that's supposed to take this M20-150, 1.5, sorry. It's just a regular oil drain plug, Dorman, so you can see the part number there if you want to do that. So that's supposed to fit that. I haven't done it yet, but I have high hopes. And then I've got a little oil fitting here, a fitting to put on the oil pan. I do intend to put a turbo kit on this, hopefully down the road. So I went ahead, I'm going to go ahead and put this in the oil pan for the return line while I got everything apart. Looking at the on-3 instructions that other people are posting, which is probably the kit I'll end up getting or something similar to that. It ends up going in here on this patch. I don't know if it really matters, but I'll go ahead and just put it where their kit specs people to install it with it in the engine, or with everything assembled rather. So I'll get that, and that's a little nicer setup than just tapping the oil pan itself. This is a lot, a lot more meat to that. And then oddly enough, it came with bolts, but it didn't come with nuts. So, and these are fine thread 5/16, so I had those on hand. But I don't know if they just expect you to tap the oil pan for that, but I wouldn't do that unless you have to. It's just sheet metal, so it's not going to be very sturdy if you don't have some meat to it. But it's not like there's any pressure on it anyway, but you'd have a tendency to strip that out pretty easy. So the next thing I'll be working on, once I get the pan back on, I still got to do the rear main seal, and then I'll get back to doing, I need to clean the intake up underneath that towel there, and then I need to get to working on polishing the intake and the valve covers and stuff, but that'll be another day. So I'm hoping to kind of get the pan, at least the pan, back on today. I did the heads and the timing the cover already. Something I've started to do the older I get too, is stop putting silicone on everything. Silicone's fine for if you don't have a gasket, you know, it's a gasket maker, but when you start lathering gasket maker, you know, RTV on the front and back of that on a paper gasket, you end up with technically 3 gaskets. So I think they have a tendency to leak more if you're gooping silicone on. Now, if you don't have a gasket, you know, go for it and put silicone on there just as your main gasket. But if you have a gasket, I'm not putting silicone on mine anymore, other than where gaskets come together. So I'm going to have a gasket here and a gasket here, so I'm going to need a dab of silicone in the corners. And if you watch Felpro's videos and stuff, and actually read the instructions, it pretty much says the same thing. No silicone unless in like joints and areas. So these are designed to take up all the voids between the material. But the other thing too is these parts expand and contract, and these things expand and contract too. So if you add silicone to it or RTV to it, all that stuff has to expand and contract, and it ends up coming apart either to one side or the other and causing a leak. So like I said, I did it the other way for a long time, and I don't think I had much problem until I went to take stuff apart. It's like prying, you know, something that's super glued together apart, which is a pain in the butt. But anyway, that's my opinion on it. Here's that oil level sensor deal. So that whole piece just unscrews out of the pan. And I did check, and this plug does screw in there just fine. So again, that's that M20-1.5 oil drain plug. So 090-040 So that'll screw right in. I'm going to put a little Teflon on those threads before I wrote it in there, so I don't plan to ever take that back out. So we'll seal her up good. Something I want to throw in here, it might be a help to some of you. These little stepper bits are just fantastic, and these are just cheap ones from Amazon or Harbor Freight or something. They come in various sizes, and these drill a better hole than a drill bit does, because drill bits rarely ever drill a perfectly round hole, and these do. I always use a little thread tapping oil with them, at least on thicker stuff. Thin stuff like this sheet metal, it's such a big deal. If you're going through a thicker piece like a 3/8 or something, keep it clean and use some thread tapping fluid. But I've used these to drill plate, like 3/4 inch plate. In fact, I needed 3/4 inch holes, which is what this is, when I was mounting a 5th wheel plate on my F550. And I just used these bits to drill the 3/4 inch holes. It's just like a regular drill bit. And I kept them cool by using oil. But man, they are just absolute. I was amazed at how well they did through plate like that. And these are just cheap bits. And I've even been able to sharpen them when I ding them up. I just take a file and run it along this backside here and clean these edges back up, these points back up, and it goes back to cutting fine again. So for just a cheap bit, they're fantastic for various size holes in one bit too. But I didn't buy those forever thinking they were just a gimmick, and I've been real tickled with them. So we're working on, I've got all my center points drilled for this guy, so I just need to drill them out to the appropriate size and get that mounted on there. And for anybody else doing this, although I don't think it makes a huge difference where this goes in this pan, but I went off of On3's instructions that I found on another page. Basically, you go 1 3/4 from this flange down, so 1 3/4 there, and then from the center line of this bolt, a 1/2 inch back. So again, 1 3/4 down, 1/2 inch back. And I don't know if that's just, they just put it there so everybody, you know, wouldn't be drilling into the side of a main bearing or what, but I think this will be fine. So here I got the little port thing installed. You can see how that works, and then it bolts in like that. Put some thread sealant on the plug here, and then I added a little bit of this Super 300 stuff on the bolts and the threads to keep that from leaking through that way. So I think that'll hopefully not leak. Time will tell. Just got done installing the oil pan, so I just wanted to share a couple little tips of what I did or what I've learned. So these are the 4-piece gaskets, which I see a lot of guys on YouTube videos are using the 1-piece rubber gaskets, so I'm not familiar with those on these pans, but this is the one that came with the Fel-Pro kit. So you got 2 cork pieces on each side, and then you got the rubber seal that goes front and back on the timing chain and the rear main. You don't need to put gasket sealant on the faces of the cork nor the rubber parts. What you do need to do is make sure you've got silicone or RTV where the cork and the rubber meet here in these corners. This cork kind of slides in a little bit of a groove on this rubber gasket, so you want a little bit of high temp silicone in there. I used some Permatex stuff called the Right Stuff. It's really, really good stuff. So just a little bit in those 4 spots. And then what I heard is, or what I was after watching some videos, is that these Fords like to leak right in here on the back. So they recommended some RTV between the engine and the cork gasket on that. What I did here is Super 300 Permatex, which is like a high tack sealant. So that'll keep that gasket from moving and also seal it to the block. It's a lot thinner, so a lot of times when you use this thicker, like this, the Right Stuff here, it squeezes a lot of it out and doesn't stay in real close tolerance. So I felt in this location here where it's just a big wide open spot where the gasket meets the block, that high tack would be better. Probably be fine with nothing, but it's just Permatex Super 300. So guys use this on head gaskets and stuff, which I don't, like I said, those go on dry unless specified. But if you're working on an old tractor or something, you can use that high tack rather, in spots like that too, if you think it's needed, or if you're reusing gaskets, because some equipment you can't hardly get nothing for anymore. So if you get back old enough in the 15s, 20s, or 10s and 20s and 30s or whatever. Anyway, that's a little tip. And then I torqued these down in sequence. Just went to about 6 foot-pounds, kind of working my way from the center out in a crisscross pattern, especially focusing on these here, making sure those are snug down at the end too. So I think we're good. Working on cleaning up the intake here, and the holes, the ports where the injectors go in, had some build-up carbon or something in it. So I don't know if this is a really bad thing to do, but I've got a little nylon brush on my Dremel tool, and I'm just running that down in there, just kind of knocking that garbage out of there, and I'll clean it up with some carb cleaner, some brake cleaner, and hose it back out. But this seemed like safer than trying to scratch it out of there with some tool, so I'm sure another kind of little brass brush or something would work fine too, but just wanted to show that because that made that pretty quick and easy. Got the intake on. Watched some videos of others doing it, more experienced builders, for tips and tricks on YouTube, which I expect you guys probably do the same thing. And several I was watching still mentioned sealer around the water jacket ports. So again, I don't like using RTV in those kind of spots, so I went back and used again this Super 300, which I think would be a superior use for that. It's real thin, it's not going to gush out and plug up your ports or get in the way of anything. And I only did it around the water jackets on both sides of the gasket. And what I like to do on these, and what others have recommended too, is not to use the end gaskets that come with the kits. Use that in RTV. So in this case, I'm not using a gasket at all. I'm just using Gasket Maker, which is the main purpose of Gasket Maker. It's not to use it in conjunction with a gasket, which this stuff, you can use this stuff with a gasket because it's so super thin. Although I wouldn't use it unless you need to, or it's recommended, which around the water jackets apparently it is on these Ford 5.0s. So I went ahead and did that. Again, front and back, I just used that Right Stuff. You can see it just squeezing out there. The Right Stuff. I ran a 1/4 inch bead front and back, and that looks just perfect. It's not gushing out all over the place. I see a little bit of it here because I put a little bit underneath this gasket and on in conjunction with that, because that's where these two kind of come together. So you want to make sure and get a little dab underneath of that gasket as it joins the gasket to the RTV. But otherwise, I think that'll work. And make sure you use the correct torque sequence, which is not really what you, in a lot of stuff you start in the middle, but on these, this is number 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then I think it's 9, 10, 11, 12. So you finish in the middle, which normally I was thinking you start from the middle and work your way out, but not on these. You start kind of in the in this area here and work your way around. So you can find that on the internet. I might pop it up here, but it's not my information, so I might not. I'll throw up some pictures of what the silicone looked like as I was putting the intake on, and give you an idea what I did. And if I screw up, I can come back and say, oh, don't do that, but I think it'll be okay. What's the worst that can happen, right? Getting the rear main install this morning. So I got the old seal pried out, and you basically just take a screwdriver, stick it in there, and pry this thing out, or from the inside, and pop it out. So I oil these because this is just a Viton seal, I think, or rubber or whatever. So oil it up real good. I put a little grease on the inside too, just to help keep that lubricated. But the little trick I wanted to share, if you don't have a seal installer tool, which it makes this easier, but if you don't mess the old steel up too bad getting it out, you can take it and use it as your tool to install the new one. It makes driving it in a little bit easier rather than just tapping in these little spots. You can stick this on there and just tap it in. You can kind of watch it as you go, tapping it all around. So just wanted to share that real fast.